This note sequence is all you need to make any footage look good quick and consistent across any devices and platforms. In this video, I'll show you how to achieve that step by step from setup, note sequence, plugins to delivery on DaVinci Resolve. And stick with me to the end for some extra tips and advice. Open up project setting in DaVinci Resolve. If you shoot log like I do, in timeline color space, select DaVinci Wide Gamut/Intermediate. Now we can take advantage of the even wider gamut that DaVinci Resolve provides. If you shoot in Rec 709, then select Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. In output color space, because I mainly upload videos on YouTube, I select Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Now some people suggest Gamma 2.2 or Rec 709A if you're a Mac user like I am. I've tried all of them and I personally like the look of Gamma 2.4 the most, but feel free to experiment yourself. All set, load in your footage. Go to the color page. Since I shoot in SLog 3 as Gamut 3.Cine, I need to inform DaVinci Resolve that, so I add two notes and I label them CST as in Color Space Transform. In the first note, find Color Space Transform in the Effect library. Drag and drop it into both notes. In the first note, insert the appropriate information in Input Color Space and Input Gamma. And then in Output Color Space and Output Gamma, choose DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. So now we're using a much wider color space as the working color space. Now scroll down, make sure tone mapping and gamut mapping are set to none so no information is compressed in the beginning. And make sure to uncheck both Apply Forward OOTF and Apply Inverse OOTF. You can Google it for more information on this, but just trust me for now. In the second CST note, we want to compress and limit the wide color space in the more narrow color space of YouTube and other social media platforms. So select DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate for input color space and input gamma, and we're going to funnel all the information and data to the color space for social media, which is Rec 709 and Gamma 2.4 for output color space and output gamma. Now scroll down. In tone mapping, I use DaVinci, but you can experiment with others. And I tend to maximize the max input to 10,000 just to let everything through. Make sure you check Apply Forward OOTF in this note because we are transforming from a wider color space to a more narrow color space. For gamut mapping, this is interesting. I will talk about this in details in the next video. But for safekeeping and fast turnover purposes, I'd recommend you to switch on saturation compression as a quick solution. The purpose is to avoid clipping of the most saturated areas. And if your footage is shot in Rec 709 instead of log, you don't need the two CST notes at all. Back to log videos. Add a new note between your two CST notes. I use Dehancer, a one-stop shop film emulation plugin to transform your digital videos to different analog film looks. Now you don't have to use it. You can simply just tweak your exposure and colors using DaVinci Resolve's built-in system. However, I just want my videos to look good and stylistic, quick and consistent without so many notes. Especially for those who are not necessarily familiar with color grading or the order of notes. So this is the tool I would suggest you to use. Download and install this plugin, and in the effects library, find Dehancer and then drag and drop it into a new note between two CSTs. Let's check everything off and we will talk about it step by step. I usually first go all the way down to options, and in quality I select high, slow. Some people like to add it in normal, fast, and switch back to high, slow before rendering. But I'm a forgetful person, so I do this first. Now go all the way back to input. Even though the latest version of Dehancer lets you directly input your camera info for immediate color space transform and just skip both CST nodes. I like to instead select DaVinci Resolve Wide Gamut to Rec 709. This is because I like to toggle on and off and compare what it looks like before and after. If you choose the camera profile route, when you toggle Dehancer off, it's just flat and it's much harder for me to compare. But this is just my preference. Under the input, you can make any quick corrections of your selected clip here. I mean, it kinda explains itself, but I personally don't use these so much because nowadays I make sure my shots are correctly exposed and white balanced. But they're here if you need them. Immediately, I will go all the way back down to Vignette. I will check if I want to add Vignette in certain footage or not. I do this first because adding Vignette tends to affect the overall exposure, so it's better to decide now before any further adjustments, at least for me. And now the fun begins. Go back up to film. Here you can choose around 60 film profiles. First, let's quickly boost some colors under Film Developer. You can adjust the saturation later. Each profile has its own characteristics. You can try them on and see which fits your mood, tone, or storytelling best. It's impossible to cover them all in this video. That would be a whole other series. But I can tell you there are a few go-to film profiles of mine, such as CineStill 50/800T, Fuji Color 100, Kodak Aerial Color 4 125, Kodak Actor 100, Kodak Gold 200, and Kodak Vision 3. I just love the nuances that these profiles bring to my footage. Once you've selected the profile, you can also tweak the look of your selected profile by dragging the push and pull. I usually don't touch this at all, but you can further adjust the exposure, color, and contrast of your selected film profile here. If it doesn't fit my narrative, I'll choose another profile. Once you've selected your film profile, go down to Film Developer. Now you can adjust your color saturation. So how much color should you boost? Well, that depends on your narrative. There is no right or wrong. And then of course you can tweak your contrast and gamma correction, which to me means pivot. But I personally don't do it here, and I will cover it in the next video. However, for fast turnover, do it here. After that, I'll skip to print first. This is where you can print your film. Again, to emulate the film looks from conventional cinema. I usually choose between Fujifilm 3513 and Kodak 2383, but you can experiment with all the other options. Or none at all if you're already satisfied with what you have so far. There are 3 things I would use here. I'll first check if I need to use analog range limiter. This gives a nice and soft roll off in the highlight and shadow, but not for every clip. So it's up to your narrative. And then in target white, what I love about the adjustment right here is that it's similar to fixing your white balance, but it's more nuanced here. It's basically choosing where you want your white to be. Whereas in normal white balance adjustment, all the information is shifted. And then you can also adjust your exposure and tonal contrast here for stylistic purposes. But again, I'll show you how I do it for more flexibility in part 2. Color density is a great tool here to give you that kind of overall deep and rich colors you often see on TV and films, without oversaturating it. I personally use this tool half the time, and I'll tell you why. Because when you boost the color density here, you boost the overall color density in the clip. However, sometimes I only want to boost the color density of certain hue, let's say the green grass, but not the sky. I'll show you how in the next video. But for a quick overall color density boost, do it here. It's quite effective. If everything goes accordingly, you should have your basic look already. But let's say you want to refine your adjustments. Go back up, tweak your saturation and contrast. Under film compression, you can bring down or even recover your highlight here to give a less punchy and contrasty look. In part 2, I will show you how you can bring down your highlights precisely by adding a false color note at the end of your note sequence. However, you can also just eyeball it without the help of false color. Film compression alone can be a separate video, so I won't cover it in details here. But I can tell you it's super useful, especially if you tend to shoot outdoor in bright daylight. In Expand, it kind of explains itself. This is where you can choose your white and black point. It's definitely a stylistic choice. And again, there's no right or wrong here. One quick tip is that if you want consistency between clips of the same or similar scene, pull up waveform for references. So now you know how much you need to pull up or down for consistency. Go down to color head. This is where you can further emulate the mood and tone of your clip. Feel free to experiment. The upper 3 slices let you push and pull the overall colors in opposite directions. This involves some basic color theories. So if you don't care, just push and pull, eyeball it and have fun with it. And then immediately below, you can also just adjust a specific tonal area of your clip, whether it's shadow, midtone, and highlight. One thing I really love about Dehancer is its film grain function. There's something about Dehancer's film grain. It's soft, it's nuanced, it's realistic. And of course, you have great control on how you want your film grains to look. I almost use it every time, even if it's just a little. We will further look into this using waveform and graphs in part 2. This is a great tool to, number 1, take the digital look down a notch, and 2, fight color banding and YouTube compression, in addition to adding some texture to the overall look. And then there's Halation and Bloom. I don't have to go too deep. For halation, I only use it to enhance the effect if it's already caught on film to begin with. Otherwise, it looks forced or fake. And then there's Bloom. It's a great tool to soften the highlights and the overall look. But in my opinion, I would advise to use it to taste. There are a few other options further down which I don't really use for my work: film damage, film breadth, gate weave, and overscan. These are to further emulate the old film look. We are actually done. If you want to do sharpening, I would suggest you to do it before the Dehancer note. This is to make sure you're not sharpening the grains that you enable in Dehancer, which we talked about earlier. Again, I like to sharpen the image to taste and scale it down if necessary. Optionally, I also like to add a parallel note to take down the digital look a little bit more. In this note, go to midtone/details and dial it down just a hint. I don't overdo it, otherwise it looks fake and filtered. That's it, bing bam boom, ready to go. It's that simple. Color grading should be fun and hassle-free. If you still want to do some minor adjustments such as changing a particular color, just add a note and do it before sharpening. Now feel free to take a screenshot. We are ready to render. So for uploading videos on YouTube, normally I choose MP4 and H.264 for codec. However, if you shoot log like I do, you can experiment with H.265 for codec because this is intended for the compression of video with a bit depth of 10 bits per channel. For bit rate, I personally go higher than the YouTube recommended guideline for my work. I upload videos in 4K, so I choose between 100,000 to 150,000 kilobytes per second. But this is for me that I'm comfortable with. So you can also do your own experiments, but in general, restrict to not more than 80,000 kilobytes per second. But you can check out YouTube's upload guideline. Most importantly, make sure in tag, choose Rec 709 for color space and Rec 709A for Gamut tag if you are a Mac user. This is probably the most important step in the whole video because if you choose the wrong tag, you run the risk of your colors being shifted or washed out. You can also check in the info of your video file. The color profile of your rendered video must be 111 for YouTube. Interestingly, for Instagram videos and Reels, I like to use QuickTime as my format with codec H.265 and everything else the same as above. This is my preference after experimenting on different formats over the years. Just a few tips and advice before I go. Number 1, shoot your videos right. Don't rely on post-production. DaVinci Resolve and Dehancers are great tools to enhance your videos. But if your clips are not shot right to begin with, there are no amount of advanced tools that can fix your footage. So learn how to expose correctly, how to use anti-filters, how to diffuse light, how to shoot your log videos right, how to white balance, how to use the right lenses, etc., etc. Number 2, be educated or at least aware of basic color theory, otherwise you can only rely on eyeballing. Number 3, learn how to read graphs and forms in DaVinci Resolve. This can help you make correct adjustments under any conditions, and make sure your videos look good and consistent across different devices and media platforms. This is especially important for those who constantly have to travel and edit at the same time. I will further talk about this in part 2. I'll see you then.